Welcome to Not Alone with Melissa Sue Methvin. I'm Melissa Sue, and today's episode is one that every parent and every future parent truly needs to hear. Let me ask you this. Do you ever wish you could go back to the day your first child was born and bring with you everything you know now? Think about it. I think about this all the time now, wishing I could go back and do it all over again with the knowledge that I have now. Do you ever think if only I had known then what I know today, I would have done things differently? Or maybe you're planning to have a baby and you wish you could start the next chapter with clarity, wisdom, a deeper understanding of how pregnancy, birth, and early development shape a child's entire nervous system and emotional world. What if, just for a moment, you could travel back in time and give your younger self the knowledge that would have changed everything? And what if you could give that gift right now to your current and future children? That's the heart of today's conversation. I am honored to be joined by Lucia Silver, founder of the Brain Health Movement, a mother, educator, and pioneer who teaches the essential pieces no one ever told us about childbirth, pregnancy, and child development. The things we didn't know we needed to know. Lucia's work blends functional neuroscience, primitive reflexes, gut-brain health, detox, emotional safety, co-regulation, and deep spiritual wisdom. What she shares today brings together science, motherhood, intuition, and the truth behind our children's behaviors, especially when they are dysregulated, overwhelmed, or struggling. Whether your kids are already grown, you're raising little ones, or you're preparing to bring a new life into this world, this episode will feel like the guide you always needed but never received. Lucia, welcome. I am so grateful you are here today. I just feel today this is like the most important episode I'm putting out there into the world, because I feel this so deeply, how we align in synchronicity in what we want to bring out to the world for parents to be. For me, I share everything about our family and my journey and my knowledge because I so wish I could go back with the tools that I have now. And so I'm just so grateful because you're in the UK. There's a 7-hour difference, and it gets a little tricky to schedule today. So I'm truly honored.
Well, thank you for having me, Melissa. I'm so delighted to be here, and had my little tissue sitting here because it's a cold winter's day in the UK. But your introduction was so moving. It's already sopping wet with my tears, because I think that sentiment that we carry, if we've been curious and bold enough to ask why our children might be struggling and really continue that effort, the first thing we feel is a little bit of guilt about what if we had done this earlier. But I will say loud and clear, better late than never, and we're here now, and we did ask why, and we are doing everything within our capacity, you and I and the many parents who follow us, to do everything within our power for our precious children. So today onwards is the message, and let's find out as much as we can and do as much as we can and continue to be in service and ask why.
Yes. Yes, I love that. Well, there's so much that we need to share. So I'm actually going to read my questions. Normally I don't now, but there's just so much. So Lucia, could you share your personal journey, how your son's nervous system dysregulation and tics led you to found the brain health movement?
Absolutely. Um, and I always say this, Melissa, because it's the truth. I didn't set out to create a movement or, the whole child healing course. I set out to save my child. Um, and when Quinn's symptoms started, it wasn't subtle. It was one severe and relentless tic where he would fully invert his body, flip his one leg behind him and his arms behind him. And it came out of nowhere, it seemed, and it shook me to the core. And the truth is, I was terrified. I didn't sleep. I worried constantly. I Googled everything. I imagined every worst case future. My mind lived 5 years ahead, picturing all the things he might struggle with, lose, or never get to experience. And I think every parent knows that feeling if they've experienced any of the symptoms that our children seem to be plagued with within this epidemic at the moment. What if this never gets better? That spiral of fear and guilt and grief and panic and confusion all at once. So I did what I guess terrified parents do. I went from specialist to specialist, and honestly, at times it felt like a full-time job of appointments. And I heard every dismissive phrase in the book, from "it's normal" to "he'll grow out of it" to "let's wait until it gets worse," and then we can always medicate, which fell pretty flat for me because I've never taken medication in my life except once when I was hospitalized and it was beyond my control. And so the idea of medicating my child was completely anathema to me. And so with every appointment, my fear just grew, Melissa, not because of necessarily because of Quinn's symptoms per se, but because nobody could tell me why. No one talked about development. No one talked about the nervous system. No one talked about the root cause. And I felt like I was screaming into the void. I kept thinking, why isn't anyone being curious? You can't give me medication if you can't explain what we're treating. What's the medication for? And why am I the only one asking why? And that's when my research began. Not gentle, not casual research, but full on 2 a.m. through the night, heart racing, mother on a mission research. And what I found changed our entire world. I discovered that many symptoms that looked like misbehavior or quirkiness or random struggles were actually signs that his brain and body were overwhelmed.
Can you describe a
Things,
few of those just so the parents listening could be like, wow, like you mentioned the tics, because I know parents have mentioned tics and what else that,
absolutely. So weak balance and coordination, poor posture, frustration, poor eye tracking, which can show up as distractibility, hyperactivity, difficulty reading, looking unfocused. For some children, it's mouth breathing or shallow breathing, irritability, mood swings, meltdowns, extensive, deep fatigue.
did he have any dietary where he was more picky eater or anything like that?
No, not for Quinn. Quinn's trajectory was quite specific because it did eventuate, has quite a specific condition. But certainly, I mean, as I tell you the story, you'll see how the symptoms started to present and unfold. But because the tic was so invasive, Melissa, that meant that he was socially disengaged. He was embarrassed. He was physically fatigued because of the tic. It made it very difficult for him to make friends. It made it very difficult for him to concentrate. And so this really was clearly not random, was the point. It wasn't behavioral. It wasn't just how it is. It was biology speaking. And suddenly I could hear what his body had been trying to tell me all along, that something wasn't quite right with the foundations. And so that's where we started. We started looking at foundations, and we started looking at movement and balance and breathing and eye tracking. At that stage, we weren't looking at diet yet. We were looking at sort of trying to calm his system, lowering or rather activating some of the systems that weren't working properly, and integrating something called primitive reflexes, which I'll come on to a little bit later, which is an area of the nervous system that needs to develop correctly in the correct order. But the changes that we saw from doing the work on those areas, he went from uncoordinated to coordinated. He went from withdrawn to engaged. He went from exhausted to energized, from overwhelmed to confident, anxious to joyful. I mean, there's so many struggling with sport. I used to throw a ball at him and he'd be like literally protecting himself from the ball, to the fastest runner, incredibly talented at football, laughing and joining in and enjoying school. And I felt like I had my little boy back. As it happened in Quinn's case, what was really bubbling under the surface was a kind of second chapter waiting to happen. And this is, some parents will relate to this if their children have an autoimmune condition. But in this case, it was the chapter that almost broke me. And this chapter was what really led to me founding the brain health movement. And that was when we discovered that Quinn had a condition called PANS, which is now affecting, I mean, we know that it's nearly 1 in 100, but we now think it's a lot more. And if you're a parent who has lived this, you know that it's a dark and terrifying roller coaster. And what it looks like for those who know about it, and for those who maybe are looking at their child now and wondering what on earth has happened, a child moves from sort of thriving to suddenly severe anxiety, intrusive thoughts, OCD, like kind of rigid emotional explosions. Some children refuse food, as you've mentioned, Melissa, or have issues around food. We didn't have that in particular, but insomnia, sensory overwhelm, and ultimately, in Quinn's case, his first seizure. And I can't describe what it feels like to watch your child have a seizure and not know whether they're going to be okay. The worry at that point became just bone deep, and the emotional load was relentless. I felt like every cell in my body was just drenched in fear. And still the system was telling us there's nothing wrong with his brain. We've done a scan. We've done everything. Wait and see. You're overreacting. He'll grow out of it. And it was clear he wasn't going to be growing out of anything. He was drowning. So I went deeper into research. And by that point, I was already, thank goodness, connected with some of the world leading experts, because I had started this kind of journey of research and outreach. And so the people who did understand the why ran some tests, and we found this kind of the last straw that had pushed his system over the edge, which in our case was mold. And we built a full healing protocol for his nervous system, his immune system, his inflammation, his gut, his sleep, his breathing, his environment, his emotional safety. And yes, for me too, which I know is something that you want to go into.
I just want to pause a little bit because you mentioned mold, because this is something we're still dealing with in our body. It's still present, even though we started detox. So did you find mold like in your home, or?
Well, the jury's out, because mold is unfortunately everywhere.
That's how I feel about it. It's like inevitable. It's everywhere. So almost like you have to make your container, your body so strong to be able to detox it on a regular basis,
I think that's true. And obviously, if there is mold directly in your bedrooms and in your home, you need to deal with it. But there is going to be an occurrence of it, particularly in the UK. It's damp, and if you're living in old buildings, it's going to be fairly prevalent. Quinn happened to be traveling in a car over one summer that had rather a lot of mold, so that was that made it all the more intensive. And that doesn't mean it's a problem for everyone, but it's a pretty pernicious environmental problem, and it absolutely affects your neurology, your entire nervous system. So it's a very important thing to address. But the added piece for me was really understanding that his healing also depended on my healing, and I guess that piece was really needing for him to feel safe enough to begin the healing, the really deep healing journey, meant that I need to shift out of fight or flight into, a calm, consistent safety. And as many of the parents listening now, the chief caregiver, mom at home, it's a very easy thing to say to a mum, you need to be calm, you need to sort yourself out, you need to address all these protocols. And there are many. You're eating, if a child is sensitized already and is having these issues, and it's a perfect storm, there's a lot of work to do on this healing journey. It's not a quick fix magic pill. And so in order to be in the right space, you've really got to start with yourself and fortify and bring yourself out of that fear state. And it's really easily said when you're at home. Some mums might be like I am, a single mum at home with very little support, or other mums like yourself, you've had a huge loss in your life and you've got more than one kiddie at home. Some mums I spoke to another mum the other day who's got 4 children, and 3 of them have got something. 2 of them have got autism. 1 of them's got a sensory processing disorder. And you say to that mum, we just need to sort you out first and calm you down. She'll tell you to go, like, when am I going to do that?
Yes.
I don't say it lightly, Melissa, because I think it's a huge adjustment for a mother to understand. It's not a nicety that you find some time for yourself to calm down. It is a necessity, not just for your own well-being, but it is the primary necessity for your child's recovery, that you as a parent are healing.
Yes, I always say it's like vital. Like, just think, this is going to change a whole dynamic of your family, making that space, because I know they're so overwhelmed. Even if I've sent red light, Matt, I say start with that or start with it's so overwhelming that sometimes they won't even open that box, because it's one more task. But maybe putting that urgency in that this is vital for you, your health, because I know that was for me. I knew I couldn't live in that fight and flight for very long, or else that's how disease grows, and that's how my health. And I couldn't do that to my children where they'd lose another parent. So it was literally life or death to work on myself, because I knew living in that fight and flight for so long, other things would come up. I've already had lived that, where chronic illness shows up in my body and living in that state. So I was already seeing those signs, and it was literally life and death. And I think for mothers, start seeing it that way, for long term. And you are I would say the moms are the heart of the family. They truly are.
100%. And we are biologically programmed to self-sacrifice. That's what we do. That's what you look in nature, that's what's happening. But as you say, once we understand the development of the nervous system, and we understand that our children cannot self-regulate, that part of their brain, that part of their nervous system development isn't mature until their 20s. They need to borrow our nervous system to be able to come out of the sympathetic state, which is the fight or flight, and into the parasympathetic ventral vagal, which is the rest and digest, which is where the healing happens, which is where the emotional regulation happens, which is where the immune system finds its balance again. And so I really try and impress, in long answer to your why did you, found the brain health movement, I impress to parents, Quinn's condition is super severe. In its worst cases, these children can be suicidal, they can be wheelchair bound, they're pulled out of school, they're committed into psychiatric wards because of the inflammation in the brain that completely sends their behavior haywire. And I'm sitting here telling you now, Quinn had one flare. He's had, and God willing, I'll be saying the same in many years to come, one big flare. Children with PANS can have ongoing flares, or can, just one. It's enough, by the way. It absolutely sent me sideways. But today, he is thriving in school. He's sporty, he's social, he's confident, he's emotionally attuned, he loves his life. He and I are super close. And that was when I realized that I cannot just walk away. I couldn't walk away, Melissa, with this knowledge, surrounded as I was by about another 8 children in Quinn's classroom who I could see had similar, neurodevelopmental challenges, dysregulation, conditions that were just, their parents were just nowhere close to knowing. Some were diagnosed, some were not diagnosed. Doesn't really matter whether you're diagnosed, makes no difference because nobody gives you any help anyway as to the root causes. So, I wanted to be able to say to patients, you're not imagining it, you're not overreacting, you're not failing, you're not alone. Right now, 1 in 4 children in every classroom is struggling. ADHD is skyrocketing. Autism diagnoses have exploded, as you've absolutely shone the spotlight on in the States right now with the research that's been released. And childhood anxiety and depression are at record highs. So conditions like Quinn's pandas were not even heard of in the UK, still not enough, but they're no longer rare chronic issues. And we need to understand why. Eczema, asthma, constipation, tics, reflux, all of this is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's not the odd case, is it? We see it everywhere. And behind every one of those struggling children is an overwhelmed parent who's exhausted, who's worried, who's dismissed, who's confused, who's full of guilt and self-doubt, because there's no clear pathway that actually addresses the root cause. And so we have to face this. And that is what really led me to stay put. I was a fashion designer and I have a hotel in Morocco and I was doing all sorts of completely different things. But this is now my calling. I really want to be in service, as I know you do, and amplify this message and empower parents to know it's not just that there's hope, there is science and scientific case studies. I've been in countless clinics. I've seen the work. I've seen it with my own child, that it is possible to reverse the majority of these conditions that we are seeing and see our children thrive.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. And I want them to know maybe from even what to, explain it from the importance of the nervous system, even a mother when pregnant, how it affects the baby, and from the type of childbirth, from C-section to, vaginal birth, what happens for the nervous system.
Yes, there is so much that happens in vitro. There is so much that happens in conception. If we could begin the story or the education, as you said, wind back the clock in your introduction, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could speak to teenage women when they're thinking of conceiving, the health of your body, the health of your gut microbiome, the health of your nervous system, how you consider delivering. That nowadays we're talking about birth. I just had it this morning. The guy, the electrician came. He said, no, we had a normal birth. He was describing the problems his son was having, which people always do when they find out what I do. And he said, no, we had a normal birth. I said, what was your normal birth? He said, a C-section. I said, that's not a normal birth. He said, oh, well, we didn't have any problems. And I said, no, but there are many things that it's not always the case, but it is more often than not the case that when a child is born by a C-section, that what we call the perfect storm has already begun. The way that they're pulled out from that area, the gut microbiome and some of the goodies that they don't get, the passage, the birth canal passage means that some of these primitive reflexes, which are movement patterns that need to be inhibited in the first year of life, don't get inhibited because they haven't come through the birth canal. There are so many things that it sounds complicated, but it's actually more about understanding. If you go back and do it the way nature intended, not the arrogant way that human beings have come in and changed the way we deliver our children and flipped a woman on her back and introduced antibiotics and bright lights and interference and antibiotics and pulling by the most sensitive area of the brain stem and upper cervical, which is the beginnings of where brain development is happening. I always say, if you think of it this way, and I think parents really get it when you visualize it this way, if you touched or handled a baby, the way that modern hospitals and obstetrics handle a baby any time outside of the birth room, you would be arrested. We manhandle these little people. And I know you had you've had some interesting delivery stories. I've had, with Quinn, a hugely traumatic delivery story. And when I look back on it, I was just waved goodbye after 2 weeks of the two of us been in intensive. Nobody over the 2 week period I was in hospital ever said, here are some of the things we're going to need to address because this, and this happened. Or when we got home, when the health visitor came, it almost felt like she just kind of prodded Quinn and went, oh, he's alive. Great. I'm off then. Really? That's it. And now I realize, my word, if you checked his primitive reflexes, if you checked what was going on with his pup, if you checked what, we would have known a whole load more. And instead, the big pharma kind of process hijacks everything for us. You have parents who, you and I alike, want a natural birth or a home birth, or wanted beautiful water births, or wanted to have something gentle, and instead, thwack, bright lights, that didn't work, let's induce, pull, push, von-twos, forceps. Oh, we've kind of ruptured that, we're going to need some antibiotics. Oh, let's mess up the gut with the antibiotics. Oh, you'll need some more antibiotics to deal with the fact that the gut's now messed up. Then your child's into the perfect storm, which creates colic, which creates sleeplessness, which the child then doesn't latch on and breastfeed, so they miss out on that, which then creates ear infections, and you're into what we call the perfect storm. And within that perfect storm, there are then interruptions to natural developments, and then we have missed milestones because we've got a lack of range of movement, which is necessary for the brain to develop. We've got a gut that's not pooping properly, so we're getting infections or imbalances in the gut. We're starting to get, dysregulated, and temper tantrums and rashes, and an immune system that hasn't actually developed properly. And instead of the system developing, it's fighting. It's fighting these imbalances. It's fighting that nature's natural course has not been followed. And so when we get a little bit further down the road and we're going, how come my kid's not regulating? How come my kid's not reading? It's kind of like expecting the lights to go on when the electrical wiring hasn't gone in yet. You've missed all the basic foundations. If they've missed crawling, or they crawled early, or they walked late, or they spoke late, these are all indications that the natural course of development has not been followed. And we see this often parents will go, oh, but the CDC now has relaxed if they know, even the CDC's relaxed the milestones. So, it doesn't matter if they don't crawl for another 4 or 5 months. It doesn't matter if they don't talk for another 6, 7 months. That's absolute BS. You wouldn't, when you have your puppy and you take it to the vet, and if it wasn't, pooping at this age, walking at this age, barking at the vet wouldn't go, oh, don't worry, that's just individual. Your puppy will do it. Your puppy will do it in its own time. If it walks a year late, don't worry. You'd go, no, all puppies do this, and then they develop this way. And it's exactly the same for brain development and nervous system development. There is a very beautifully God-created, nature-created course that we are supposed to be following. And when it goes off track, it is an indication that something is not okay. It's not an opportunity to make a new normal and go, 6 months later is absolutely fine. It's not. It's a red flag.
It is a big red flag. And this is why what we're going to talk about today, these red flags, is giving the tools that I wish I had when my son was colic for 4 months. When he was a late talker, there was all the outburst, the screaming, and now I was thinking, how many mothers, it's my milk, maybe I changed my entire diet and this, but no, his microbiome and his nervous system was so tight. The tongue tie, that's one thing. Since I'm a dental hygienist, what I learned was actually a nervous system that's wound up. And that's why the tongue tie is so tight. So you can avoid surgery by working on the nervous system. That was a huge aha moment because my son had tongue tied. He had so many of these signs that you talk about. And so we need to bring this awareness to know what to do for the mom that just gave birth to a child and seeing these signs. And And I think your brain health movement, I mean, you have a free masterclass right now for moms that they can log on. And I watched, it was so powerful. And for me, it was like, wow, I wish I would have had this. You know, instead of me being in the hospital, I'm just, oh, this is what you need to do now. This is, and the shame if you wanted to say no to a flu vaccine for your baby, or wanted to say no to a certain type of, you know, and but you're medicated, you're exhausted, and there is this shame that comes if you, like, you're going to hurt your baby if you don't do these things. And but bringing that awareness that what it can do, and so this is so important and could be pivotal in someone, like, giving them the better chance for their child that I wish I would have as a baby for my kids.
Yes, and we need this message to be stronger than the message which is, you're not doing the right thing, just take the drugs. That the cards are stacked against our kids in many ways. We're raising them in a world, aren't we, Melissa, where big pharma promotes symptom management over root
Oh,
cause, and
my
big
son was
tech.
prescribed. I remember asking, because I did a brain scan, and there was inflammation, and just like you, they knew I would probably say no. I'll try everything else before, and they prescribed 2 medication. What was this? Anti-seizure, and they had not diagnosed him anything, but they said, well, maybe this other I was like, well, why? Like, why? You know, so I'm like you, but get very, very curious and ask more and more and dig more questions, and as to the why, and how I actually wrote this in my book that I'm editing right now. The Gut God Connection is the whole birthing and what I wish I would have known, you know, are my
Yes.
experience in this knowledge. And
It's about turning up the volume, isn't it, on the right things, and empowering mums to not feel like they are kind of raging against the system, but actually it's their right to ask these questions. And the problem we have, which we just touched on briefly, but while big pharma promotes symptom management and big tech is hijacking attention, sleep, and development, and then processed foods are selling these ultra processed chemicals disguised as foods. These forces are shaping childhood almost more than teachers, parents, and communities. So, what we're trying to restore is actually something beautifully simple, but because in many ways it doesn't make the same money as pharmaceuticals and tech and processed foods, it's a return to nature. It's calm co-regulation. It's simple whole foods rather than foods in plastics with lists of ingredients we don't even understand. It's less plastic, it's less packaging, it's less toxicity. It's connection instead of screens, and it's conversation instead of all the comparisons that we get on social media and performance anxiety. And it's a world that feels human again, because we're not trying to create super kids. We're trying to give children the environment that their biology recognizes, so that their brains and bodies can thrive and heal and their spirits can breathe. That's the origin of this entire movement. It's actually stripping back, everything else is just getting piled onto our kids, these huge stresses, this what we call the whole toxic load. And that's what we're trying to find a voice to change and empower parents to implement that change.
yeah, and how do you, okay, so you have this mother that's so overwhelmed right now and wants, how are you going to empower her? Like, just for her right now, you would say, just listen to your free master class and start there, just kind of understanding the importance of her own, you know, probably nervous system. Like, how do you approach parents right now?
Yes, I think you're right to use the word overwhelm, because I think if there is one thing that defines more of the parents that approach us for help, whether it's our one-to-one parent support sessions, our triaging them onto experts, or whether it is just I'm lost, I'm confused, I don't know where to start, they are at breaking point. And so just a chance to understand that they're doing nothing wrong, a chance to understand that these often it's not about the stresses going away, it's about increasing your window of tolerance. And the masterclass, which is called From Burnout to Breakthrough, helps mama and it is normally mama, I have to say. Sometimes it's dad, sometimes it's grandparents, but predominantly it's mama. Understand that there's nothing that she's done that's wrong, but that the likelihood is that from where she is right now, she's containing for the entire family. She's exhausted, and her behavior is probably becoming quite unlike herself, from crying or emotional, withdrawn, angry, losing it suddenly when she thinks she's okay, not sleeping, wired thinking and not able to sleep even though she's exhausted, looped thinking, repetitive behavior, just so many signs of burnout, that really, to begin with some very, very simple steps around taking care of herself. And yes, I would just jump on the free masterclass and just give yourself that. It's not even an hour. Give yourself that time to understand what is happening for you and breathe. Breath work is so fundamental, Melissa, and this is your heartland of what you do.
Because it was the biggest gift I learned myself. I knew this is what, I still remember in that fight and flight where I thought I was having a heart attack, sharp pains in my heart, to not eating, not sleeping, and being guided just for 10 minutes with breath work, and how it calmed. I always say this, your nervous system best friend, how everything calmed down. I mean, everything came back up afterwards because I'm still so much happening days after my husband passed. But those 10 minutes made me realize how breath was so important. That tool, and learning that tool was vital for my life. And the best thing, once I teach people how to do it, it's free and you have it with you anywhere you are. So you can carry it. You don't need an expensive machine. You don't need anything else. But once you have that tool, and your kids will too, those are great ways you can connect with having these breath and moments, of connection.
And you can't heal from panic. So, a child has to feel safe to begin this journey. And their only way they're going to feel safe is when home feels safe, and home is you. So it's inextricably connected.
Absolutely. And so now there's lots of things I didn't want to miss. So let's see here. How does the parent's nervous system, emotional state, and co-regulation capacity impact the child's nervous system and brain health? So you've said a calm, regulated parent is a child's greatest teacher. So we touched base a little bit on that, but just how pivotal that is, even from the first time the baby is born, when you put it on your chest, that moment of co-regulation. But what happens if, the mom or the parent is dysregulated? So then that child right now can't co-regulate properly. So they're both on a dysregulated state. So that's where it's so pivotal.
Yes, it is. And again, that will land, painfully for some parents, because they've already had that process. They were already in that state, and but it's not too late. The beautiful thing about neuroplasticity in our nervous system is it's ever evolving, ever changing. And so we can absolutely address a lot of the areas that have been or become out of whack, that are not where they need to be. They're out of sync. The system is out of sync. And together with our children, we can heal. And I think that's, that's really the important thing to remember.
It's never too late. I've started all this process with my kids, and I'm still learning which ones they gravitate for, their nervous system, to work on every day. And this is a continuing thing, even for myself. Just last week, I was so overwhelmed, when you're the solo provider, and then on top you have, your business, and I was feeling a lot of overwhelmed, and I could tell that shifts the whole family dynamic. And then I'm exhausted at night, and those storms still happen, they still escalate, but at least I'm like, oh, I need to really make sure I do even more work. I have these practices. When I'm in those overwhelmed state, I can observe it, reflect it, and say, okay, what works for me? For me, it's breath work, spiritual practice, cold plunging, built a lot of stress resiliency, that my body felt safe when there's a lot of stressors. It could be more calm when they kind of hit me. And even my daughter, after there was a couple of really hard days last week, she woke up one morning, I woke her up for school, and she's like, Mom, no, I really need a reset day. You know, she knows that now, you know, where we will connect. We will spend time in nature. Nature is like our favorite, you know, grounding. My kids are always laughing. They're like, touch the tree, put your feet on the ground, you know, and those times are really important. And I'm okay. I'm not advocating pulling kids out of school, but I am having okay to have mental health days. We call it, you know, reset days. We really need it. It's not going to be any use for me to put it back in a system where they're bombarded with a lot of deadlines, a lot of, you know, nervous system dysregulation. Staying home might be the best thing, and we're going to work on that and connect, you know.
100%. And I think it's also to know that for those who are thinking, I'll never have a whole day, I can't do that, I've got to work. It doesn't have to be that. It's a dedicated, it can be a dedicated half an hour of really deep co-regulatory connection with your child a week. It's much more about how you are maintaining your energy in yourself in their presence. And like a muscle, the more you do a repetitive exercise, the more the muscle becomes attuned to it. The same with the brain and the nervous system. Each time you don't respond in that explosive way, and you're able to respond and use breath work and use various techniques that we teach to expand your window of tolerance, the next time becomes easy. And importantly as well, which many of us have heard talked about, but I love to repeat it to myself because I'm a sucker for self-punishment and telling myself I could have done better each time. But there is such deep value in repair after rupture, because life is never, ever going to be entirely smooth sailing. And nor should we teach our children that the only way through is to kind of not react, because that's not human either. But where Quinn and I have found such enormous value and growth and strength and understanding is in the repair after the rupture. So I'm not advocating screaming at one another. I'm not advocating having dysregulated meltdowns where you're both on the floor in a pool of tears and you've said things you didn't want to say. But somewhere between 0 and 100 is a place where we don't always behave the best way we want it to. And there is an opportunity there to sit with your child and be raw and honest and say, this is what was happening for me. And I'm sorry that I didn't do better today. This is what I wanted to be able to say. This is what I want to be able to hear. I want you to tell me what you're feeling now that I'm calm, and you make it safe. And Quinn has often said to me, Mummy, do you know, I used to really not like it when we had upsets. Now I don't mind so much because we have these incredible conversations afterwards and we connect so deeply. And then they don't really happen so often after that because we had that opportunity to understand. So it's not about a bad word never said. It's not about never losing it. It's not about, because it will happen. And that's okay. It's what you do about it afterwards. It's how you take responsibility for it, make it honest, make it vulnerable, and make it safe. You don't have to overshare with your children and tell them every teeny weeny reason of what happened in that afternoon that led to that. They don't need that. They just need you in your honest openness, and they need to feel heard and understood. And they need the opportunity to hear and understood that you're fully human too. Because in that space, no one wants a perfect parent. They want a parent who is loving and real and messes up sometimes and explains how and why, so they can mess up sometimes and know that they're still lovable.
Yeah, and not feel as much guilt on their end. Because if we never apologizes, then whenever they just think they're the bad ones, you know, and you know, if we never do anything wrong. And another thing that I've noticed is like really maybe even journaling or documenting when those outbursts arise for yourself. Okay, what led up to it? Like for me, it was I'm completely exhausted. I'm overwhelmed. I haven't made time for some me time. You know, I haven't made time. So I started seeing these patterns, and that's why I kind of put a premium on our sleep because mom needs that window of time in the evening. You know, you go in your room, your bed, 8, like it's so sacred for me. I need some downtime alone. afterwards, and so sleep is huge, and in getting that quality sleep. And I see that in my children, and not running them amok too, and nutrition. I know you kind of touch base a little bit about nutrition, but nutrition I've seen, oh my gosh, just a huge change, removing dyes like red dyes and all the dyes, and seed oils, like inflammatory things for my kids' behaviors as well, not having these outbursts. And
Oh, it's massive. It's massive. I mean, there isn't very much. I mean, particularly on our course, Melissa, that we suggest for kids that we think mum shouldn't be doing too. The whole family, for that matter, needs to be doing. And yes, nutrition is massive. A clean environment, remove toxins, huge. But I've noticed for myself, we're so fanatic, as you say, about getting our kids to sleep on time, and then we don't go to bed on time. We don't get the sleep, as you say. Or in the mornings, I make Quinn the most incredibly nutritious breakfast, but I don't make any breakfast for myself because I'm so focused on getting him to school on time and getting high protein and beautiful homemade, eggs and fruits and seeds and oils and, great stuff in for him. And then I'll take the dog for a walk after I drop him at school, and then I start work, and then it gets to about 11 and I haven't even drunk any water, let alone eaten anything or
that
had
sounds like my morning. I have not eaten yet because I
It's
was
so
too busy
sweet.
taking care of everybody else.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I realized that, for example, when I make his smoothie, I just suddenly thought, what is my excuse? I could make a smoothie for two. It's not even more work. Just make the smoothie for two. What am I doing? I'm pouring his, and then I think later on, oh, that would be really, really good for me. And no, I can't be bothered now. I've got to chop all the fruit. Why didn't I do it at the same time? So some of it is just being reminded to put yourself in the mix and do, the same stuff. So yeah,
You use whole child multidisciplinary roadmap. Can you unpack what that means?
yeah, of course. So when I say whole child and multidisciplinary, or what we mean is the brain health movement, is there's no single magic pill, no single cause for why our children are struggling with, whether it's, just to repeat again, it might be ADHD, it might be autism, it might be sensory overload, anxiety, meltdowns, tics, Tourette's, allergies, autoimmune conditions, right? So it's always multifactorial. One child struggles perhaps with energy production because digestion is impaired. Another maybe isn't breathing well and spends their time, which most of these children do, by the way, in sympathetic overdrive. That's in fight or flight. Another may be stuck in an allergy loop with an autoimmune response. These are similar storms, but different ships. So every child has their own biological fingerprint. Every plan needs to be unique, but the sequence must follow nature. And the sequence of our whole child healing course is really what parents need. It is the best of the best, handling each piece of the healing hierarchy and then working in unison. A lot of parents will be hearing about, oh, I need to do something about the gut. Oh, I got to do some movement integration. Oh, I got to do audio processing. Oh, I've got to get rid of environmental toxins. And they don't know where to start. They feel overwhelmed. There's different clinicians and specialists for different aspects of that healing. And up until this course came to life, I had never seen the whole child approached in one course, but also not done in the right order. I have seen and taken brilliant practitioner courses, but it's siloed information. So narrowly specialized and deep diving into one area like gut and diet, or covering lots of things, but kind of contradictory opinions on symposiums where different doctors are saying to do different things, and it just leaves a parent overwhelmed. So what was missing was the whole picture, all the stresses, all the systems, all the sequencing, clear, connected, and coordinated. And so that's why we built the whole child healing roadmap in this way. And Dr. Tony Ebel, who's one of our neurologically focused chiropractors, who really hones in on the birth trauma, which is where so much of this begins, the in vitro, in womb, prenatal stress, the delivery room. He said that this is the only course he recommends, not because just the knowledge, but the order, because without a sequence, it's just more noise for an overwhelmed mum. It's not just knowledge is power. How do we clearly heal a dysregulated child while we're also making dinner? How do we do it? And parents don't need more information. They need simple, immediate, effective actions in the right order. This course has that in spades, Melissa.
I agree. Like the simple step by step, I'll get them there. Yes. I think that is so needed. And I'm taking your course. I'm starting it next week because I feel I do want these next steps. And even though I incorporate some of these, but I feel you really have that order properly laid out in all the specialists, that really touches base on everything. Because then I have been started on all different avenues and no clear direction. I've seen so many different specialists. And like you said, the detox, I've done that, and still doing that. And it seems like we still have mold in our bodies. We still have these kind of bacteria, gut health issues. And it's, it takes a while to heal. So it'd be nice to see the step by step and not get overwhelmed. So many parents hear diagnosis labels like ADHD, ASD, OCD, tics, anxiety, learning delays. You emphasize the symptoms are not random. They're intelligent signals, which I love. They are. I always say, they're signals. How do you encourage parents to shift from seeing what's wrong to what's happening and why?
That's a great question. I think so often we come from, why is my child behaving this way at the worst end of the spectrum, to chasing symptoms at the other end. Like, what can I do about the tic? What can I do about the meltdown? What can I do about the not sleeping? And I think the first place to begin is by reminding them that, and me, I'm speaking to myself now, children aren't giving us a hard time. They're having a hard time. They're having a hard time. Their behaviors are not random, as you've said. They are neurobiological, immunological messages. That's the immune system, the brain, and the biology. And when we shift from what's wrong with them to what is their biology trying to tell me, we stop firefighting and we start healing. So I think that's the kind of premise, and it's a huge mindset shift. In fact, it's a huge mindset shift when we look at life in general. Rather than looking at people who seem to be like impetuous or impatient or dysregulated, that's a biology speaking. Nobody sets out to just behave badly in this life. I really believe that.
I believe that too. So getting to that root cause. So how does the parent's nervous system, emotional state, and co-regulation capacity impact the child's nervous system and brain health? We've already asked this. Never mind. Okay. Primitive reflexes appear central in your work. Could you explain what primitive reflexes are, why retained reflexes matter, and how we might spot them or address them in everyday life?
Yeah, sure. And I want to make clear up front, Melissa, I'm not a neurodevelopmental doctor. I'm not a functional neurologist. I am a mum who has been studying and working with things like primitive reflexes with my own child and shining the spotlight on them and seeing the results of what this is. And this really should be common vernacular. We should be talking about it like breast milk and birth delivery, and it should be part of our conversation. It sounds scary, like what the hell is primitive reflexes? But to put it very simple, they are our baby's original survival software. They are automatic movements that are wired into the brain. And they are brilliant and active at birth. And they are there really to develop the nervous system, because we are born with a brain that is not fully developed. There is 80% nearly of its development to happen outside of the womb. So there are certain reflexes and movements that we need to be making as a baby before our brain is even fully developed. So some of us might be able to picture a couple of them, like the rooting reflex. When you come near the mouth here, the little baby's mouth moves like this, right? That's not the brain. That's an automatic reflex to find the teat for breastfeeding, right? And then the palmar reflex in the hand, when you do a little baby and you stroke the little palm and they go like this, that's again a very automatic reaction. That's not the brain leading that. That's the early signs of this autonomic nervous system, the primitive reflex. When babies are startled, when there's noise in the room, or they drop, or suddenly they go like this. You can picture little babies doing that. That's the Moro reflex. So they're brilliant at birth and they're there for survival, but they're problematic if they don't integrate. They should all pretty much have been integrated after the first year of life. So just to give you anecdotally some of the correlations that we see, if a child still has a retained startle reflex, which is essentially for when that lion came in the room, and you need an elevated heart rate, you need, your Moro is there all through your life. It can come back for a moment, but it's there to increase your heart rate, get your cortisol up there, and get you running. It's your survival mechanism. But if your Moro reflex is retained and it's activating inappropriately, it is the equivalent of feeling like the lion's in the room the entire time. So what does that look like? Well, it looks like constant stress, anxiety, poor sleep, sensory overload. You're in like the highest level of alert all the time. So that's one example of a primitive reflex. If it hasn't been retained, which is often the case with our children because they're not moving as much, they're not getting as much stimulation, they're being put on screens as early as 18 months, they're being put in, they're swaddled, they're put in car seat carriers, in baby carriers, they're kept still, they're not grounding with nature and crawling around as they need to. So these primitive reflexes are integrated through movement largely. And if those movements aren't happening, those reflexes are retained. A couple of other reflexes, one is called ATNR. That one, if it's not integrated, it causes handwriting difficulties and poor eye tracking and reading struggles. And we see in the majority of cases when children are having difficulty sitting still in the classroom, having difficulty with scribbly handwriting, having difficulty with anxiety, and so forth. When we test for those reflexes I've just cited, 90% of children have not integrated those reflexes. So that gives you an idea of how critical they are in the normal neurodevelopmental path. So once you integrate these reflexes and you improve the eye movements, you see reading improving, you see motor control improving. So that's what I mean by it's not behavioral, it's neurological, and it's profoundly fixable when you know what you're looking for. 100%. Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of the learning disabilities are to do with two or three of the primitive reflexes being retained. So they're a wonderful barometer. They are not the problem. They are a barometer to show you that something's been missed in the orderly formation of development.
So important. I remember thinking, your mom's intuition. I always say, always trust your mom intuition. Well, I had these specialists come to our home. Actually, my son was 3 to just kind of test him. I just knew something was off, but I couldn't pinpoint it. So I said, well, I'm going to hire people and they come observe him. But nothing is ever talked about the nervous system. So I'm so happy to have you on here. And so to move on to another question now, because I really don't want to miss anything. In your work, you emphasize drug-free root cause strategies in a culture increasingly looks to medication for neurodevelopmental challenges. How do you support parents being stuck or pressured?
Education, understanding why medication is not the only way. There is a time and a place, but our modern medicine is allopathic, which means that our doctors are trained to operate or medicate. Our doctors are not trained to look at the root cause. That's functional medicine, which it always, completely breaks my brain that we have functional medicine, which is awe-inspiringly complex, and these doctors study for years and they understand testing and they understand the interrelationship between organs and systems and so on, and they've kind of been relegated to this sort of inferior medical system, whereas mainstream medicine, which is simply dealing with symptom presentation, is kind of put at the highest level within the hierarchy. So when you start to educate yourself, you can start asking your doctors the right questions and advocating for your child. I'm not saying that there is never a place for medication. It can save lives. but it is not the long-term solution. The body knows best. The body will, once it is given what it needs, or once those things that are impeding its correct operation, we call it homeostasis, when it returns to balance, it knows what it needs to do. So that's what we need to understand.
That's beautiful. That's how I feel, and I maybe rooted back to how my mom taught me to just go back to simplicity, to root cause, to using what's here, nutrition and some supplementation. But even then, it's just an adjunction. But we really have to look within our nervous system to the root cause. So, given our focus on children's emotional healing, what role does fear versus trust play in brain health and behavioral expression?
Well, fear keeps the nervous system in survival mode, and we've touched on this already. And I think that's the simple bottom line. Trust allows it to stand down, and we build trust through predictable rhythms, through emotional honesty, through co-regulation and breathing and repair and safe connection. And when we shift from controlling behavior to understanding biology, we create a home where learning and healing can actually happen. And I think it is as simple, I honestly think it's as simple as that. It's not simple, it's profound, but it's not complex. It's not
Yes,
complex.
I saw that with my own kids, the trust, the safety, feeling safe. Because a lot when they lost their father, they were really, scared. What are we going to do now? We don't have dad. How are we going to be okay? So they need to find safety in me that I can make these decisions. We're going to be okay. But they had to see that, and for me to be kind of grounded and do the work and move slowly and build that trust. There was a lot of questions, especially my daughter. She was only 8 years old. They were 6 and 8. But building that trust was so important to her. She had so many questions as to why did dad, die by suicide? They learned early on what that was, only because they were there. They were there. And for me, I could tell for her it needed to build that trust. And that was really hard because I felt like, well, how much can I share for this 8-year-old exactly? Might be too much information. Maybe later on, I would even tell her that. I said, maybe when you're older, I can explain more. And she really didn't like that, and so was building that trust, and she was ready for it. I didn't have that with my son, so I kept it to wherever they were in their levels, wherever that trust was. But definitely finding safety in me, saying that we're going to be okay, allowed them kind of to relieve some of that heaviness for them, to show that they're going to be meals on the table, that we're going to continue on, and one day at a time. And that could be the safe place to bring up these questions that they had.
Yes, I mean, what you've been through is extraordinary, Melissa, and what you've been able to furnish and provide and do for your family is extraordinary. But I think you would be absolute testament to, how well you are is the key,
Yes.
right? How well you can self-regulate. It's all very well saying provide routine, provide regularity, provide dialogue. Just know how much to say to your children. No, that was too much, that's too little. We only get to understand that when we are connected to ourself,
Mm.
when we are self-regulated. And from taking care of yourself, then you can trust your mama instinct. Because I think sometimes you go, I was trusting my mama instinct, I was throwing saucepans across the room because that's what felt right to me in that moment. No, that's not trusting your mama instinct. That's just, you just lost it right then, and that's absolutely fine.
Yes.
But to trust yourself, not just trust the
Actually,
process.
to trust yourself was huge. The biggest lesson that I had, to trust yourself, because I had a play therapist for my kids, and I had therapy, and many of them, after my husband passed, said, don't change anything for at least a year. Stay in the same home. Don't change too much, because they've had the world turn upside down. But I was living in Wasilla, Alaska at the time, and I knew, isolated on 50 acres and going through another dark winter, 8 months of winter, for me would not have been a good recipe for my own mental health. As much as my kids absolutely love Alaska and still do, I couldn't be there anymore. So so my husband passed in March of 2022. By July 2022, I had moved my entire family to Arizona because I knew I couldn't live through another winter. I did the opposite, but what I did know, I had to listen to my intuition. I knew nobody in Arizona, but something I had been there before, but something was calling me there. And now I know why. I mean, there's so many miracles that have happened since then. But that's where I say you can trust your intuition as to what do I need to be the best mom that I can be for my kids right now in this moment. And for me, was all the sunshine. And here, Arizona, I feel like it's a mecca for healing. I mean, this is how I got integrated into breath work, cold plunging, and it's beautiful. And the community that I didn't even know I needed is where I'm at. So there were so many factors there. So yes, I love that you say trust your intuition as to what you need as a mom almost first, because then I provided them that safe place that for their healing, and now they are thriving. It's not perfect. I'm still learning, but they are thriving and they are doing well considering everything they had gone through. And so now we also speak about environment. So you speak about gut brain, detox, and immune support. How relevant is our environment? So I know this was very relevant for me.
Yes, it's hugely impactful. Children today are swimming in what we refer to as the whole toxic load, and we try and keep it super simple when it's this important. You can divide your kind of toxins, if you like, into emotional and physical and chemical. And this is a step-by-step process, really, to start to break it down and understand where these stresses are residing in the whole family's life. There's physical stress, which we've already alluded to, can start with birth trauma and poor sleep and mouth breathing and the structure of the face and how it's developing, the teeth, all the stuff that about the
Yeah.
teeth and
Oh,
jaw.
yeah, I've had plenty of airway specialists like ortho to talk about that, to bring awareness, how
Right.
important to protect
It's
a
huge,
child's
right?
airway.
It's huge.
Mhm.
Then you've got infections, you've got lack of movement and screens instead of play. So that's the physical environment. Then, if we look at chemical environment, you've got ultra processed foods, sugars, additives, pesticides. All the glutamates and the glyphosates. In America, worse than anyway. All your food is sprayed with it. You can't get away from it. Plastics and mold that we've touched on. There are 80,000 chemicals that didn't exist in our childhoods. So that's the kind of chemical terrain. Then you've got the emotional terrain that we've spent most of our time actually concentrating on here, but which is our ability to co-regulate for our children, but it's also stresses from elsewhere. So school stresses, overstimulation, bullying, um, disconnection. So when we look at all of this, their bodies are spending so much time and energy just trying to detox, right? And compensate, that they barely have capacity left to develop. So that's why addressing and stripping back these environmental stresses is so important, and doing that in the right order. So if we were addressing birth trauma, then we take our child back and we look at neurologically focused chiropractic, some hands on to help with the repair of these areas that have been pushed and pulled. And we get nervous system safety in place first. And then, when appropriate, we can move on to other systems. Well, breathing's
I
pretty
feel like you do need to work on the nervous system first. I see that.
100%.
I see that in my program too. That I even start. It's like you got to start with the nervous system because all the parasites and the toxins, they won't be able to detox properly if
That's
you're
right.
always in that
Fight or
fight and
flight.
flight. Yeah.
I think when you understand, which we teach again on the course in great depth, that the vagus nerve is kind of running through the entire body like the superhighway, delivering everything. And within that nervous system ecosystem, if it's out of whack, it can't do the hormones, it can't do the immunity, it can't do the sleep, it can't do the digestion, it can't produce the energy. So when you understand if that is out of whack and it's in a state of high alert, you can't heal from a state of panic, right? Think about it. You just kind of think of what your body feels like intuitively in a state of panic. And our children are in that state of sympathetic dominance. There's not a child I've seen that's struggling with any one of the conditions, let alone sometimes it's ADHD and autism, it's sensory with eczema and that, compounded conditions. But very, very rarely are those children ever in anything other than that sympathetic dominant state. So the first thing is the safety.
Oh, yeah. I know. I keep saying I need to start a program like teaching the teachers and at school and the kids that start young, kindergarten, even preschool, teaching them like movement, even dancing breaks and the tapping or the humming and,
Mhm.
all or the affirmations to help with bullying, build that self-confidence. So I don't know. I feel like I really I love working with children. And I every time I volunteer at my kids' school, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so much fun. But I really do see that as an importance to bring that for them, for their nervous system, and teach them those tools. And if you could speak to parents of children just beginning to show signs of dysregulation or learning attention struggles, what are three most important actions they can take immediately?
Three important first steps. Well, it's not going to surprise you what I'm going to say for the first. Regulate you. So rather than, oh, there's something wrong with my child, let's focus there. The big lesson I've learned in my journey with Quinn is that was the final golden piece to the jigsaw puzzle. And I'm still working on it because there's so much I need to do to help myself regulate and heal from trauma that existed before Quinn was even a twinkle in my eye. So we've got our whole journeys to, big journeys to resolve. But first, regulate you. Calm parent, calm child. Number two, I would say, is reduce overwhelm. So, wherever you can, if there are stresses, it might be school, it might be the sensory overload, it might be the number of activities, it might be broken routines, it might create safety where you can through lowering the stimulus that's happening and understand. And again, we go into this a lot of the time in the course, bright lights at night. No, try and follow the natural circadian rhythms of light, replicate nature where you can, spend time in nature where you can, increase predictability. The nervous system likes to know what's going to be happening next. So you touched on routine earlier, but reduce overwhelm around foods. An obvious food that creates overwhelm is sugar. Take it out. If you want to bring in something sweet, bring in a healthy raw organic coconut sugar, or bring in a little bit of organic honey, if you need some sweet. So wherever you're seeing overwhelm coming in, help reduce that overwhelm. Magnesium baths at night, just
Yes.
things that will just settle the nervous system. And thirdly, get the foundations checked. So, if you're looking to your child next, and of course for yourself, start with the nervous system. Find someone who will truly listen to your story as parents. That's looking at your pregnancy, looking at your birth experience, your stress load, your child's early development. A neurologically focused chiropractic for me would be the absolute A1 first visit.
I
Combining
need to find one in Arizona. I really do.
and sometimes when we create safety and give a baby or child the biology they need, um, whether that's movement, rhythm, connection, sleep, and digestion and ease begin returning naturally. That's the thing, and you touched on it before. I think it's sometimes when you put that in place, the body will find its way back. It may not need as much supplementation. It may not need as much primitive reflex integration. Once the nervous system and the body is safe, a lot of those other sequences just fall into place quite naturally.
I believe this is so good. And lastly, what has changed in your own journey as a mother, advocate, and educator since you began this work. How has your spiritual understanding, intuition, breath work, trust deepened and shaped the movement you're leading? So just, yeah, what's changed in your own journey? And I know you have your movement now and masterclass, but you're trying to get this message globally now. And I truly want to help you do that. And because I feel this message needs to be global. Every parent or soon to be parent needs to hear this. So how can we help you do that? I feel if listeners right now share it to other moms, other parents, share this episode and because and take that master class. I really do. I mean, where do you see this going next? How can we help you get this message to as many parents as we can?
Oh, wow. So many questions and so
I
much.
know, sorry, I'm just really passionate about your work
Oh, bless
and,
you. But there's so much and so much important stuff you've just said there. I think we need to know that there is hope, and we need to know that there is science, robust science, that is sitting behind what we are seeing in our classrooms and what we are seeing in our children. So the first point is to feel confident enough to start learning. Get the information, learn with us at the Brain Health Movement. You will be amazed when you start listening to my Mighty Quinn, our podcast. When you listen to this podcast with Melissa and you start thinking, that's what I'm seeing with my kid. That's what happened. Oh, I had no idea that caused that. I had no idea that movement was so important. You might be with a hyperactive little 4-year-old son and you've just given birth to a baby. So now you'll know what to do with your little baby. And if you're conceiving, you'll know what to consider in your nervous system and what to eat and how to address your environment. It's affected my life. You said, how's it changed my life? In every way possible. I now see the world through a nervous system and brain health lens. Instead of thinking, what's wrong with that person now, I find myself asking, what's their nervous system telling me?
that's what I do. I'm like, "Oh, it's your nervous system."
Yeah. And with
Yeah.
children, I'm observing their posture, their breathing, their eye movements, their
Oh, me
screams, their
too.
food.
You find it hard sometimes? I really see it, especially in kids. Like I see you talked about allergies, or I see these signs, and I so want to go to the parent, but I have to kind of be mindful how I communicate it. But I see it. I was like, oh, sometimes I'll put little messages like, "Have you ever, thought about this?" Or, you know, and now at least I could pass along this episode. Be like gently, be like, "Well, maybe you'd like this episode. Maybe."
Or you can invite them in for
Clarity.
some breath work with you. It's kind of like, but spiritually, this journey, it's what's it done for us? It's for both of us. It's deepened our trust, not in blind positivity, but in the understanding that the brain and the body and the parent and the child are always doing the best they can in the state that they are in. You know, my work now is helping families change that state gently, respectfully, and effectively. And why I keep talking about burnout and nervous systems and real root causes is because I don't want to hand out hollow hope. I want to give you the how. I want to give you the way that honors science and honors nature and honors not just your child's humanity, but yours. How this really is possible. My child, Quinn, my mighty Quinn, named the podcast after him, is living proof of what is possible. And I think hopeful is so infinitely powerful, but intelligently, scientifically backed hopeful is so powerful, while hopelessness is one of the worst states we can find ourselves in. So I think in the first step, it is that. It is feeling empowered, excited, curious. If your child has received a diagnosis, if you, as an adult, many adults are getting late diagnoses now and making sense of their world quite late in life, that is not the end of your journey. That is the beginning of your journey. Your diagnosis is the beginning of your journey. Well, the podcast is My Mighty Quinn, and it's available on all of the platforms. And there's a sub series called A Mother's Conversations with World Leading Experts. So that's there. The free masterclass is called From Burnout to Breakthrough, and we'll share that link too. And then there is our course, which is the Whole Child Multidisciplinary Roadmap to Healing. So those three are really our anchors. We have a lot of free resources also on our website, thebrainhealthmovement.com, Melissa, which our parents and your followers are welcome to use and abuse. Just download everything that you can from that. There are guides that cover all the different disciplines we've talked about. And genuinely, the podcast episodes have followed the pediatric world leading experts. So you're in good hands there. And then if that feels like the foundation is there for you and you feel ready, then have a look at the course and see if you're ready to enroll. And on that, you can absolutely do that at your own pace. It's 12 weeks online. You can do it in your own time. It's yours for a year. We have a whole community support videos where we jump online and help parents going through the course as well. And if they need further support, we have one-to-one parent support sessions as well. So
this is fantastic. This, like you said, will bring hope to so many parents, like mamas, out there. And I'm so proud of what you're doing. And I'm so grateful that I found you. And actually, it's me digging more into the whys. And I found a podcast you were on. And I was like, I need to have her on. I need to have Lucia on. And thank you for saying yes. And I look forward to sharing with our audience and parents. And I know we will change so many lives and children's lives and in generation. Think about, even now, maybe your children are grown, but maybe you're going to have grandkids, and now you're going to be able to educate and see it through a nervous system lens. That's the way I see it as well, just like you. So Lucia, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your story, and the pathway you've built for parents and children alike. From nervous system co-regulation and primitive reflexes to gut-brain detox, emotional safety, and spiritual alignment, you've given us a lot to hold, reflect on, and act upon. To listeners, if you were touched or inspired by today's conversation, I encourage you to visit Lucia's The Brain Health Movement site, explore her course offerings, free guides, and join the community of parents who don't accept the status quo, but choose to heal and restore. As always, on Not Alone, you are not walking this journey alone. You are seen, you are loved, and you are empowered to trust your intuition, your body, your children, and your deeper wisdom. Until next time, keep breathing, keep listening, keep loving, and remember, healing begins with trust. I'll see you next week.